I'm Becky Braunstein. Welcome back to Microcosmic Storytime with Becky. Tiny little weird fascinating stories from history that you never hear about because no one else cares. Today we're going to talk about Timothy Dexter, the weirdest SOB who ever lived. Timothy Dexter was born in 1747 in Massachusetts when Massachusetts was still a British colony. He was uneducated. He started working as a farm laborer at the age of 8. And then when he was 16, he got a job as a leather apprentice. When he was 22, he married a rich widow who was 10 years older than him, and they bought a mansion. But like the other rich people in town did not like him because he was just this country bumpkin who had married into money, and they were just like, ew, gross, get out of here. He really wanted to fit into rich society. He wanted to be richy rich. His whole goal was to just be like Johnny Rich guy. So he thought, if I could just get a government job, then I could have some status and maybe the rich people will like me. So Timothy Dexter wrote dozens of letters over and over and over and over again to the city government begging them for a job, but nobody wanted to hire him. So finally, out of just sheer exhaustion, they created a government job for him that was called Informer of Deer, and his job was going to be to let them know about the deer population in the town. Here's the thing though, there were not any deer in this town. He's not a rocket scientist, he's not a smooth guy, he's just not the sharpest knife in the drawer. But he got his government job, goddammit! So the Revolutionary War is going on, America becomes a country. At the end of the war, the continental currency, the money that they were using in the colonies, was worth such a low value that people used to joke that something wasn't even worth a continental because it was that worthless. So Timothy Dexter, for whatever reason, bought up a bunch of that continental currency money, bought just a ton of it. He was just sitting on all this worthless money, and everybody thought he was insane and stupid and nuts. Well, then guess what? The new United States government decided they were gonna buy back that money to strengthen the economy, and he sold his worthless money for way more than it was supposed to be worth. He made a pile of money. He was the first Bitcoin farmer. Miner? Engineer? He was the first Bitcoin guy. So he trades in his Bitcoins for just an indescribable amount of money. He figures himself he's gonna start a business. He builds 2 ships and he sets up an export company because he figures that sounds impressive. So the other export businessmen in the town were like, we gotta get rid of this guy because he's got way too much money and he's competition. So what they did was they cooked up this scheme where they told him hey man, click here, one weird tip. You know what you need to do to make a bunch of money? You gotta ship warming pans to the West Indies. That's what's up. He's kind of a gullible guy. So he believes them and he buys up just a bunch of these warming pans, which were used to heat bed sheets back in the day because it was really cold in Massachusetts. But they want him to send the warming pans to the West Indies, which is at the equator where it's 100 degrees every day. So they're thinking he's gonna do this and it will bankrupt him. So he buys all these warming pans and he's like, totally, I'm gonna make me some cash. So his ship captain gets to the West Indies and is like, what in the f***? We are what am I gonna do with 100,000 warming pans on the surface of the sun? So he's like, I'll be damned if I'm not gonna make some money out of this. So he decides to sell these warming pans as ladles for making molasses, which was the big industry in the West Indies. And he sells those and makes a bunch of money. And he sails back with the money and hands it over to Timothy Dexter. And he's like, okay, so we're gonna start sending winter stuff to the equator. That's what we're doing now. So his next shipment, he sent a bunch of wool mittens to the West Indies in the middle of 100-degree heat. And here's the thing, when this ship got there with the wool mittens, there were some merchants from Asia who were heading back home who just happened to be there at the exact time that his ship showed up, and they bought all of the wool mittens and took them to go sell them in Siberia, and he again made a ton of money. So people started hearing about this, that this weird guy was making all this money selling strange stuff, and they started joking about it, and people were ribbing him in public and coming up to him at the bar, and they were like, hey man, you should sell coal to Newcastle. Because Newcastle in England was the place where all the coal mines were. Their whole industry was coal. So selling coal to Newcastle was ha ha ha. He took that seriously and he got a bunch of coal, sent it to Newcastle, and his ship got there at exactly the time that there was a huge coal miner strike in Newcastle, and all of the coal miners walked off the job. He sold his ship full of coal and made a buttload of money. Who is this guy? Is he a time traveler? Did he find an almanac? Is this Biff Tannen? I don't know. So now he's out of control. He's out of the box. He exported Bibles to the East Indies. He exported stray cats to the Caribbean, which everybody thought was nuts. But it turned out in the East Indies, the missionaries had run out of Bibles and they bought up the Bibles, and the people in the Caribbean were experiencing like a major rat infestation on the islands, and they gladly accepted the stray cats and let them loose on the islands to go after the rats. This guy is making money. It seems he can predict the future, but like all the rich high society people, they want nothing to do with him. But he really wants to fit in, so he just starts calling himself Lord Dexter. He just made that up, and that just became his title that he created for himself. And he moved into a great big house in like the gated community where all the really rich people lived. Like it was like the Beverly Hills of colonial Massachusetts. And he looked around and was like, oh, hey guys, I guess we're neighbors. Anybody want to come over for some fancy ass tea or whatever? But he was such a weirdo that like he could not rein it in. Like people were coming over to the house out of sheer curiosity to see what the hell was going on over here, because like things were starting to deteriorate in his family. Like he was out of his mind. He was spending money on crazy shit. He was fighting with his wife and his kids. And like it got to the point where like people would come over and he would tell them that his wife had died. She hadn't. She was still alive. And that the woman that they saw in the house was her ghost. And she just put up with this for quite a while until he faked his own death to see how people would react. They put on this whole like funeral and 3,000 people showed up. He went and like peeked in on the fake wake, and then he just popped out of the rafters and started throwing money on the crowd and was like, huzzah, I'm alive, got you, f***ers. So he watched his wife at the fake wake and she didn't cry, so he had her beaten for not being sad enough that he died. This guy was a nut. And she still continued to put up with him, but not for long, because he kept building on his house. Like he was turning it into a castle, and he had like a moat. It had a huge golden eagle on the roof, and there was like marble columns, gold toilets, shag carpeting, lava lamps, Persian rugs. He had hundreds of clocks in the house that he used to talk to and threaten. He built a mausoleum for himself with like silk-lined mahogany coffins all laid out already in it, and he would like go in there to take naps. And he had 40 wooden statues put up in the front yard of like famous men of the time, including like George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, and like Napoleon. And then he had one made of him, and on his statue he had inscribed, I am the first in the East, the first in the West, and the greatest philosopher in the Western world. This guy was 6 miles out of his mind. And his wife was so embarrassed by this monstrosity of a house that he had created for her to live in that she moved out. She was done. She had enough. We were one gold toilet over the line. So she moves out and their dipshit son moves in. And they just start turning that place into a den of iniquity. Just drunken buffoonery, ladies of the night coming and going, setting stuff on fire. And according to witnesses, the curtains in the house that were once owned by the Queen of France had become covered with unseemly stain, offensive to sight and smell. Like one time a guy was walking by the front yard and Timothy Dexter told his son to go shoot the guy, and he was like, I don't want to shoot him, Dad. And he was like, if you don't shoot him, I'm gonna shoot you. So the kid runs to the window and like aims his gun out the window shaking and like tries to shoot this guy who's not even intruding on their property. He's just walking by enjoying the scenery. And the kid shoots at the guy and misses. Well, Timothy Dexter was not done. At the age of 50, he wrote a book called A Pickle for the Knowing Ones, or Plain Truth in a Homespun Dress, in which he complained about politicians and the clergy and his wife. And it was written with no punctuation of any kind, just words that were randomly capitalized, and it barely made sense, and he just went around handing it out for free on the street. But it became such a huge hit because people were just rolling on the floor reading this nonsense that a publisher picked it up and reprinted it 8 times. And people were so weirded out by the fact that there was literally no punctuation in the whole book that for the second edition, Timothy Dexter added a page to the book that was just 13 lines of punctuation marks with a little piece of instruction that just said, people complained that in the first edition there was no punctuation, so here is enough punctuation that they can pepper and salt as they please. Timothy Dexter died in 1806, and he was buried in a public cemetery, not his snap mausoleum like he wanted. Maybe he should have been nicer to his wife. But he lives on through his absolutely insane book and this one remaining wooden statue. Moral of the story is roll the dice, because apparently luck will beat out education and hard work every time. And just because somebody has a lot of money doesn't mean they're not at home soiling the curtains and shooting at the neighbors. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like the video if you enjoyed it, and subscribe to my channel for more stories and other fun stuff. You can follow me on Twitter at Becky from Alaska, on Instagram at Becky Braunstein. See you next time.